Okay, enough foot dragging. This one's Lords of the Renaissance. It's a Phil Eklund game. There's a small series of these Lords games. The most popular of the pile is Lords of the Sierra Madre, which I covered before. And I actually like this one more from what I remember. But the rules to this one are a little bit more painful. And you can see the components. I think Lords of the Sierra Madre's first edition had questionable components too. The components are kind of iffy. And what you'll see is the game is nearly unplayable because of component issues. If you had a map the size of the Lords of the Sierra Madre map, or even just twice the size of this map, this would be a fairly playable game. There's another factor, which is, unlike Lords of the Sierra Madre, this one doesn't come with money. And money's going to be necessary. Got little pennies here. Now, unfortunately, I usually, when I play this, I go through about 2 cups of pennies in the course of a game. This is all I have for pennies. It's one of the reasons I haven't been playing. I've thrown a bunch of dimes in that I'm going to use as 5s or 10s. That's going to make the play a little less pleasant than the big stacks of pennies, to tell you the truth. Every so often I would say, okay, look, I have to make change. But for the most part, I think I'm going to have to use the dimes as 5s, and that's going to make maybe the board a little bit more manageable, but it's going to be harder to find out how much money anybody has particularly easily. And that's definitely a concern. I may end up getting to the point where I can't finish the game. I can't get beyond the first few turns simply because I run out of pieces, those being these pennies. But, well, so be it. Because there was a huge donation put in to get this done by User Local. I knew I didn't have enough pennies, but I'm just not gaining them. Yes, I could go out and buy myself a roll of pennies and then return it and not lose much money that way. But that's just not the way I work. My wife and I currently don't produce pennies the way my ex-wife used to. We lived on a cash economy then, and usually would buy things using cash and almost inevitably get pennies back, have to roll them. And I had a big old jug, a wine jug filled with pennies, which would be about half filled. Now I have a big old wine jug hoping to fill it with pennies, but we never get any. Okay. I am not going to try to go through the rules in their entirety here. Not by any means. I've read through these a couple of times just recently, and I still don't really have a great feel for how this game works, even though I've played it before. What you're going to be doing in this game, like in Lords of the Sierra Madre, it's essentially an economics game, but a kind of weird design of one, where each turn a card's going to come up. Players are allowed to bid on it. Eklund loves this bidding mechanism in one single event comes up and everybody gets a chance to bid on it. But there are also a pile of cards that are available, again, like Lords of the Sierra Madre, that are available for bidding on any turn. Any player can kind of bring them up for bid. And, well, unlike Lords, they don't all go at once in this. It's not a matter of dominating some small sector of or some important sector of the board is very easily gained. And you're not going to have enough money to buy a significant amount of the cards. What that also means is quite often the turn card, the card turned up for the turn, is not as valuable as what's up at the beginning of the game. And I've got most of the pieces on the board here. These are the starting characters. The player gets to be one of them, and he'll have one of these cards to relate to that. He'll have a bank of his aligned color, which doesn't necessarily start with his starting person. So let's take a look. The Augsburg Bank here is held by the Hanseatic player. The Hanseatic player starts here, but his bank is down here, which means his military capacity of his main character may not be in the same place as his economic interest is. That can cause problems. If you're familiar with Lords of the Sierra Madre, you usually want to have your property protected by your troops. Well, that's still the case here. But there are other troops available. In particular, each player is got an opportunity to be handed one of these, which are the main empire personages. So, for example, the House of Lancaster would be in control of England's troops. In addition to those, if you're playing with a significant number of players, you have these Chancellor cards, which control the economic might of the individual empires. I tend to play in 6 players because that allows each player to kind of control one empire in its entirety. Which empire you pick is a bit of a difficulty, but we'll get to that in a moment. You have a bunch of different economic sites which are kind of marked on the map here. For example, you have your banks, and the printing kind of gets blurred over here. What is this, aluminum? Yeah, that's aluminum. You have your silk route. No, that's a spice route terminating there. I think this is silk up here. Like I said, the graphics are very, very bad. Okay. So, you also have, like in Lords of the Sierra Madre, a pile of cards, and these are the things that are going to come up. Some of them are going to be edifices that you can build. Some of them are going to be events, like this. This is a plague that could come up. Guilds that, again, you can build and produce money. Some of them are going to be more characters that come into play. These guys are kind of funny because they're weaker than the ones that are available for free. Very similar, again, to Lords of Sierra Madre, where at the beginning you want to spend your money, and you usually don't spend a lot, on getting the important military characters, and then what comes out of the deck tends to be the lesser characters, the things that are going to help you break the ties, as it were. Well, maybe they don't here, but okay. Let's see if I can find... Okay, each character has a rank or stature on him. And you're going to be starting probably with a stature 2 character, but there are a couple of characters that start with stature 3. The emperors are stature 4. Most of these cards that come with a character, I think they come out as stature 1 characters. Really lesser lights. There are also princesses that you can marry and such not. There's a whole bunch in this. I'm going to try to capture what the game is actually about here, rather than how all these things interact. But to tell you the truth, that's the thing that's eluded me in reading the rules. It doesn't come across through the rules, but after a couple of turns, you begin to get the feel of what it's about. Okay. So, I've got also errata scribbled in here somewhere or another. I have printouts of a bunch of errata, and I'll be using what I have of that written in here if I can understand what I wrote. Each player is going to have one of these calendars, much like the calendars in Lords of the Sierra Madre, which gives the entire sequence of play, and you use a little marker to indicate what's going on here. And you also can indicate how your projects are maturing. You're going to be paying a coin each turn to kind of develop your projects. After you bid them, they usually go on here, and then they proceed through there until they're finally mature, and then they start producing money or whatever on the board. Here you put your actual lords that you control under there. So for example, if you'd have your own character there, but you'd also have, say, the King of England on this same kind of track that you'd be keeping track of. Okay. In terms of counters, yeah, lovely, lovely things. You have your regular military units, and they have 2 steps. When they take a hit in combat, they take a hit on the side. Same thing with your caravans. You have a couple of types of boats, galleys and round ships. You have some markers for guilds, and I think edifices are on the other side. Yeah. or whatever. No, those are like, I don't know, supply trade ports, if you control the supply source for that. You have your bank counters. There aren't enough bank counters to cover more than 6 people. Basically, there are enough bank counters for 1 person of each empire, which is perhaps one of the reasons that I keep it down to 6. The game should work pretty interesting in more than 6, actually, because you have kind of this need to cooperate to run an empire's sphere. But I think the game is very interesting in 6, where you're sort of running an empire for your own profit as someone who's aligned with it. Okay. Now, when you set up the game, you get to pick one of these characters who start on the board anyway. The neutral ones are there as well. Each person gets one of them. They're their personal character. They will also get their bank in the location that the bank is noted. So, for example, here, this guy, as we said, has his bank in Augsburg. If, let's say, I don't know, the player who ends up being aligned with England is this, he would get his bank, and this would be foolish, but he would get his bank down in Augsburg. And then foolish because if you're the red aligned player, you're going to be controlling the English forces. So you're probably going to want to, if your bank is in here, you're probably going to want to be aligned with the Holy Roman Empire. That's something that kind of the choice of characters at the beginning presages, is what empires those players are going to take. And if you end up with a conflict at that point, the 2 people who conflict, at least one of them is going to come out far behind the rest of the players, and it's quite possible both will, if they decide to split the empire between the ruler of the empire, the emperor himself, and the chancellor. Okay. Each player chooses a starting color after they pick their starting lord, I believe. Yeah, and it's based on the order of the lords, although you could randomize that if you like. So after you pick your starting lord, and that actually isn't specified in the rules, but don't worry, I mean, it's an Eklund game. The rules are really, really, really something you have to try to figure out how to make them work. So after you pick your starting character, you pick your starting empire. If someone else and then you get both the lord and the chancellor of that empire. And the chancellor is going to control the imperial treasury and caravans. The lord is going to control the imperial troops and boats. If someone else picks the same aligned country as you, so let's say you pick England and then someone else picks England, well, then you have to give them one of the 2, either the Chancellor or the Lord. And that's important in a 12-player or a more than 6-player game, because you won't be able to divvy up the empires, one person getting one empire. You're not allowed to align to more than one empire, so in general, unless one empire conquers or another or something weird happens, you'll just be controlling your one empire and trying to some extent to expand its influence. But your goal here, as in Lords of the Sierra Madre, is to get the most wealth at the end of the game. Unlike Lords of the Sierra Madre, there aren't alternative victory conditions written into the rules. Clearly, being something like the Emperor yourself, or being the King of France yourself, well, that deserves some bragging rights in the same way as being president in Lords would. Okay. And all the caravans and boats are going to start in a fixed setup. You're going to be allowed to move them at the beginning of the game. A couple of players have some special rules. Ivan of Russia and Kush Kadam of Egypt. These are the stature 3 leaders. They have more military might They also, though, don't come with a bank, which means they have less economic might. Now, they happen to start on nice places, though. Both of them are in places that provide stuff. So they have kind of a use for their military towards making money. The bank is going to help you make money in a lot of ways, which is a reason you don't want to not have one, because that is a source of power and money in the game. All the leaders who are on the board currently are not going to collect taxes or recruit mercenaries. I'm sorry, they will collect taxes and recruit mercenaries, so they can become kind of wealthy during the course of the game. Your personal treasury you get to keep here on your card. That's money that you can use yourself, and those, I think, transfer from your personal counter right at the beginning of the game, but I'm not sure. Money accumulated by your units, though, things that you control, other leaders you control, the empires you control, and such not, that money's actually kept with them, and you have some capacity to influence its use, but not tremendous. It's got to be used for its own purposes, largely. Okay, let's try to look through this. So the first thing that happens in the game is a card is flipped over, and people are allowed to bid with personal gold. If no one's willing to bid an individually highest value, then you roll off to see who gets it. So if people tie, everybody throws a buck on it, they each have a chance at getting it. At the same time, you're allowed to auction off these green cards, and you simply announce that you're putting one up and you're putting a buck on it or something. Then we go to spring, build, and refurbish armies, ships, and caravans. Now, for this segment, and if you build an edifice or something, it goes into the immature projects thing, and it's going to move up each year. More than a year? No, just once a year. Okay, during the building, you're going to be paying 5 gold in order to build a mercenary army, 8 to build round ships, 5 per army or galley, or 4 for caravans. Now, the Imperial forces can build their own troops, and they have their own army and caravan counters. For other people, there's these mercenary armies, and you can build those up to give yourself some combat strength in the game. Now, you're only allowed to, I think, command based on your stature. That's the number of troops that you can have under your command, if I recall correctly. We'll get to that. Voyages of Discovery. These cards you can't just buy. You have to do a Voyage of Discovery to get to them. And we'll get to the rules on those in a little bit. Cards that come up that are in the New World, though, you can only sell, or you can only even bid on if you've either discovered the Caribbean or if you're on a Voyage of Discovery hoping to do so. You can also pay to refurbish damaged units. When units take hits in combat, it's going to cost 1 gold, and you refurbish them at this point. There's rules for the non-player characters to kind of automatically do the refurbishment, etc. And then you determine who is going to be the first player. Now, the initiative in this, like in Lords of Sierra Madre, goes to the person who has the most M cards. M in this doesn't stand for Mordita, it stands for Machiavelli. Spies, where their equivalent count as 2 instead of 1. And the person who has the first option to move, it's an interesting situation, because basically what happens is, if you're the first player, you may move your pieces first, and if you choose not to, you can move your pieces last, and so on down the order. So if you're the second person, you can move your pieces second, but if you don't do so, you get another chance to do so immediately before the first player gets his final chance to do so. That's kind of tricky to remember, you'd think, but usually people don't have a lot of pieces on the board, so it actually works out okay. Ships are able to move, I've got penciled in 5 sea zones. The person holding the Emperor card controls the Imperial troops, so he chooses where to move those. Of course, he can do that. You could bribe a player to make a certain choice to help you out. So you could pass a gold to someone to use the Emperor's great resources to help you a little bit in this circumstance, and that's kind of cool. Galleys have to end their movement in ports. Round ships can stay out at sea. Armies are able to only move into an adjacent Alpine duchy or up to 5 lowland duchies. They can also be transported by ship. The Alpines are the ones with little mountain markers in them. At the same time, you can move leaders. They can move up to 10 movement points if they don't have any armies with them. They can pick up armies, and they're limited to commanding a number of armies that they're moving with equal to their stature. They can only carry armies of their same color. Now, this is kind of weird because your color is something you declare here, but it's often influenced by the color listed here, which is somewhat of an indication of where your power base is. So that guy, the white sheep, I think, he's over here near the Ottoman, is that Ottomans? Yeah, near the Ottomans, and he has that indicates that he has a titular claim to the Ottoman Empire itself, which means if the emperor dies, he has an opportunity to become the emperor. But it also kind of indicates a degree of interest in that area, which means quite often if you take the white sheep as your character, you're going to be interested in taking the Ottoman Empire as your empire. There might be alternatives there. So, for example, if somebody else grabs another leader and takes the Ottoman Empire, you may want something else, like, say, Aragon to be your controlled power in that case. Just so that you get both the leader and the chancellor. Because chances are you will not get what you want if you're the second person in an empire. Okay, let's see what we got here. All right. What did we go? We just did the refurbishment and recruitment for the players. The non-player things are going to do the same, and they're going to undeplete their units, and they're going to automatically buy troops if they have enough coins. Then we go to a spring naval move combat, and I've already kind of started talking about movement. You'd move your navies. I haven't gotten to conflict yet. Then you'd get another card for the summer. So it's several cards per year. Then a fall card comes later, and then a winter card comes later. This is all baked into a one-year thing. So I'm going to be putting 4 cards in each of these slots. And then as the years go on, this is the first 1460 set of years. Then there's a 1470s, etc. going through. So there's several opportunities. As to how long the game goes, there are many different ways you can judge how long the game goes. If you invade forces of an empire that is not controlled by a player for some reason, those can go up for auction, and then they're kind of used by the person who wins that auction. So that's usually a bad choice unless you have, some huge advantage to doing so. Combat itself, each player moves his fleets, then resolves his land and sea conflicts. I believe you do your movement and attack together. The other guy can't run away beforehand. Combat itself is going to be a buckets of dice type game. You basically roll 2 dice. You roll a die per step of units. So an army would normally get 2 dice in combat unless it's flipped over. And you have to roll less than or equal to a 3 to get a hit with at least land combat. I think they all kind of work the same. If an army doesn't have a leader, it can still attack if the player has the leader, the Empire's L card. Mercenaries can't do anything if they're not led, though. Got rules for sieging. In those cases, the die rolls have to be 1s in both directions to do any damage. There's not going to be any retreats in a siege. 5.82 says you roll simultaneous. I think you just get 1 round of combat. The losing side is retreated, and that's going to be the one who's... Okay, so the guy who has to retreat is the person with the worst total of total number of troops multiplied by the rank of their highest ranked leader. So a highly ranked leader gives you a nice multiplier to your troops. That doesn't help with much except in terms of holding the territory. If you completely wipe out a force, it's got a 50% chance of the leader dying in combat. Otherwise, he's going to be captured. You're allowed to, if you end up hitting a city and capturing it, or if you just end up stacked with it with your troops, if you're the legitimate holder of the city and somebody builds an edifice there, you have the right to just sack it or pillage it. And you make a die roll on a 1, 2, or 3, you do a hit, and the counter is either depleted or destroyed, depending on the type of counter it is. Usually, like in Lords of the Sierra Madre, it's better not to just burn the opponent's stuff. It's better to work out some kind of deal. He has something in a city you control. Okay, I deserve a gold every year for that, or whatever. Sometimes you can't come to a deal, though. Sometimes it's better for the person who owns it to lose it than to be paying you a bribe. Leaders can be arrested. You have to get a hit on them, but if you get more than 1 hit, you accidentally kill them. That's if they have no troops with them. When they have troops, you do the leader killed in battle situation. Leaders who are captured are put off map onto the calendar of the captor, and then you can ransom or execute them at your own leisure. All right, summer taxes. That comes after the summer card comes up. First we do the spring naval movement. I don't see a spring land movement here. Summer gets land movement and fall gets... summer gets mixed movement and fall gets land movement only. Okay. So during the taxes round, this gets twisted. So for the first 6 years of the game, that's the first 24 cards, and the game could be over within that, each city or port occupied by armies of the imperial color or without armies and within imperial duchy, so within the color zones of the empires, is going to produce a gold to the empire. Cities that aren't occupied by leaders or armies and outside the imperial boundary don't collect taxes. I hope this is the boundary. Okay, good. It doesn't work if players hold stuff in the imperial territories during that. And each empire has its own tax base, which is written on the board, and that'll match the cities they start with. Now, all right, we'll keep going. Any city that's not in a colored imperial duchy or not occupied by imperial troops, but with a leader or edifice counter, is also going to collect taxes. This money goes right into the stack, and it's controlled by the highest stature leader who's present, i.e., your character is sitting in a town taxing it at the same time. Taxes collected by allied leaders stay on the map, and they'll be spent only by that leader, basically. He's got his own stack of money. You control the leader on here, but whatever money he collects, for whatever reason, except if you cut a deal with someone not to use him or to use him in a particular way, which can give the money directly to you on your calendar. But from taxes, that won't happen. The imperial taxes, they go to the imperial treasury, which will be with the emperor himself, I believe. It may be with the Chancellor. The Chancellor, I think, controls that. I'm going to probably be playing 6 players, and chances are very high that each one will take 1 empire to begin with. But there's some complexity that comes when that happens. If you're at a stature 3 leader, you can take taxes from every city in your duchy, not just the city that you occupy. You can also take taxes from any satellites you have. Some territories have satellites to begin with. So the Republic of Genoa here has Caffa as a potential tax base. So if he goes up to level 3, he not only gets his taxes from Genoa, but he also gets the taxes from Caffa coming back. Likewise, over here, the Republic of Florence looks to me like it has Florence. It also has Pisa, so it could collect 2 taxes if the Medici go up to level 3. Not all territories have a second city in them. Many do not. But for those that do, or have a satellite, that counts. If you marry a princess, you might get an additional satellite. Doesn't really help you if you're not level 3, though. Starting on turn 1466, inflation takes place. And from then on, no regular taxes come unless there's an edifice in the city. And that changes the spirit of the game tremendously. Initially, you're producing money pretty much wherever you're parked. As time goes on, the empires become less and less important, and the individual player pieces, where they choose to invest, are the only cities that become important for taxation. Capitalization works very much like in the original. And it's only done here in the advanced immature project. So once a year you get to move forward a space. You can only do that if you spend 3 gold. And if you only pay 1 gold, you get to keep it here. If you don't pay even that, you have to discard the project. You won't, you've just lost it. Now, I don't know if that project is discarded. It's discarded for rebidding, which means other players can bid on it at its current level of maturity. If the edifice, guild, or resources inside an empire occupied by imperial troops, and some player controls the empire's C or L card, imperial funding can be used. You must hold one of those 2 cards, or the empire can be not player controlled. If it's not player controlled, it will automatically subsidize. If a city itself has a stack of gold, that stack of gold can be used to subsidize maturation of cards. This is a big deal, right? If you control the Holy Roman Empire, then you control whether or not investments there are improved. Now, those investments can help the empire as a whole, but how much do they help you? And you might be willing to pay for their maturation out of the imperial treasury, especially early on when it's important, when the imperial treasury is more important to the game, in exchange for a little bribe to your own pocket, right? And again, a lot of this game is about that kind of bribery, very much like Lords of the Sierra Madre. Okay, then you declare trade routes, and basically trade routes, you're going to be wanting to take, there's certain pieces on the board, edifices, banks, and such not, guilds, that want to be supplied by something. So a mature R card, that's the resource cards over here, will place a resource counter on the map. Well, that's one of these suckers, not that, on the back of the guild, that indicates, hey, I've got this kind of resource. It'll get 3 gold in the fall, which is noted on the card, if it can get a trade route going back to the proper supply source. So in this case, you'd want to get slaves. If you can trace through armies, I believe count. No. Caravans and or fleets are what you have to trace through. And you can trace through land territories occupied by caravans, or you can do an overseas route or a mixture of the two. Other things like banks and guilds, well, banks have to trace their trade route back to a silk port, except for Trebizond, which has to go to a spice port, just because that's what's close. The silk is too close. And the guilds have to go back to specific needs, like textile needs aluminum, metalworking needs mines, shipbuilding needs slaves, woolworking needs a link to an edifice. The glass blower will be treated the same as woolworking. Okay. Edifices need sugar or spice to earn money. You don't want to build these things if you don't have the capability of putting the route in place, because you won't make any money off them. Now, when you trace the trade route, you trace it through a series of adjacent duchies and seas occupied by caravans or fleets. You must trace through cities. And in particular, each space, each sea that you transport through, and each land area is going to hit a city, and that's going to produce a gold for that city. You can't use part of a besieged city. Armies can be part of the trade route too here. I don't think that's the case, but okay. If more than one route is available, the route that pays out the least in gold, that one gold per. So what's going to happen? Let's say I'm tracing. I don't know. What do banks trace to? Banks trace to a silk port, and that's Azov and Erzurum. Erzurum. I don't know where Erzurum is. It's up here, and Azov's here. So let's say I have a trace of boats and maybe even some land units going up to here. I'm going to be taking one coin from the general bank, as it were, and put it on each city as I go, each territory that I pass through, on one of the cities of that territory. The choice of that is up to the guy who is the merchant. But I cannot choose a route, if there are multiple routes available, that pays out more coins on the path. Now, to use caravans and boats, I have to have the agreement of the players. So what I may do is say, look, I'll give you a gold to let me use your route. But somebody else could say, I will let you use my route for free. That doesn't affect this payout thing, but if his route is shorter and thus pays out less from the bank, then I have to use his route no matter what my deals are in terms of bribes, etc. Which is an interesting fact to look at. Basically, you get this kind of maneuvering to try to create the best trade route for someone else's goods that goes through your territories, so that you collect the cash in areas that you need cash for. It's kind of weird to explain. Maybe you'll see it as it goes. So armies and navies in a strait can sever the trade routes, either maritime crossing through the strait or overland over the strait. They could instead, however, demand a tribute. But remember, if that thing is just closed, that may actually hurt that trade route. There may be an alternative, longer trade route that is less beneficial to the person who's closing the route. Quite often, if you have the power to say close the horn, the Golden Horn, well, you also are very interested in seeing trade go through there. So if you start demanding a subsidy for that, what you might find is some longer path comes into play and other people get your money. So you'd be better off not demanding a tribute. That's just a factor there. Let's see what else we have here. In the fall, you have to roll for anybody who's north of the Tempest line, which is, I believe, this thing, i.e. if you're not in the Mediterranean. That's for ships that are north of there. each ship is going to take a hit on a 1, but galleys take 2 rolls, which means they could be destroyed in a single storm. Then we hit Winter Depletion. After the Winter card auction, I'm not doing everything in here in order necessarily. I mean, I'm trying, but some of the things like the movement, hey, it happens 3 times in the game. It's a little different each time, right? Spring it's naval, summer it's both, fall it's just going to be land movement. The card auctions, there's 4 of them interspersed within there. The winter depletions, each city can only support 1 army inside of it. Any extra armies are going to be depleted. Anything that's that's not in cities or at sea or is under siege takes a depletion unless you pay a gold. And, well, anything over the support value does. All galleys plus caravans in the Alpine are going to be depleted until 1 gold is paid as well. The galleys, though, after 1466, when money becomes a lot harder to come by all at once, those start being able to pay for themselves at that point. So they stop being a liability. Machiavelli cards, they allow you to do things like they do in Lords of the Sierra Madre. So, for example, you can put something back up to bid with them. You might be able to cause a color change in armies. Spies allow you to counter other people's Machiavelli cards. There's just a bunch of stuff there. All right, now we come to the winning the game section, which talks about not really winning the game, but lots of special rules for some reason. It eventually gets to the victory conditions, but there are some special rules in play. So one is Voyages of Discovery. If you have an Explorer card, you can launch a voyage to discover a sea route. You indicate this by moving 1 or more of your round ships into this little area here. And then the Explorer gets moved to the Immature block on your calendar, and he can be advanced in the same manner as Immature cards with Imperial funding if you have an Empire C card. When you become mature, you're going to roll on a table and see what you discovered. And you can discover all kinds of things. They may involve getting you one of these X cards, which indicate a rudder to a certain location. Those rudders can then be sold. There's modifiers to the die roll. And basically, the Cape of Good Hope gives you a shorter spice route. The New World gives you the ability to capitalize mines and plantations and such not in the Caribbean. At the end of the game, those rudders are going to be worth 10 gold in victory conditions. And specific players have the rudders, not an Empire, not the Discoverer, not anything like that. You can change your stature. At the start of the game, you can change from stature 2 to stature 3, that's Duke to King, by getting 4 allies on your card who are stature 2 or 1. And that's going to give you, remember, some little extra ability in terms of, it gives you the ability to command more troops, less need to retreat, but it also gives you the ability to collect taxes over a larger area. The problem with this is, usually by the time somebody gets there, it's past the 1466 turn, so then taxes become kind of hard to collect. You can only collect them from cities that have an edifice in them, and that's very few cities. So taxes are very important early on, and by the time you get important enough stature-wise that you can collect more taxes, well, you're probably close to the end of the reign in which you can actually collect those more taxes, because edifices are going to be fairly rare on the board. Okay. Getting up to level 4, though, requires you become an emperor. Let's see. You can marry a princess. if you're Catholic, you must be unmarried to bid on a princess. Everything is either Catholic or, I think, Eastern. Maybe Eastern Orthodox. No, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, they have Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Muslim. So most players are going to be Catholic, which puts you subject to the Pope. The Eastern Orthodox and the Muslim are not subject to that, and that means they can actually have multiple marriages. In the case of, say, Protestants, there are some Protestants in Scotland and Bohemia in this, or Proto-Protestants, or Eastern Orthodox. It probably doesn't mean that you're actually being a bigamist. It probably means that the transfer of property rules that applied to matrimony aren't really in play in those areas as deeply as they are in the West. Which is to say, if you no longer are married to the woman, you no longer control her property. So even if she's dead or if you divorced her or whatever, she takes her property with you. But that's not going to be as big a factor in the case of, say, well, Henry VIII, although that's a little before this, or in Russia, where the church didn't tend to protect those rights as much. Well, that's my assumption as to how it works there, why you can get more characters. Marriage is also important to having a legitimate heir, if that comes up. If an emperor or pope dies, then there's an election, essentially, of sorts. The current emperor in every card really has the name of the character and then the name of an heir. This is not really being clear on the video. The name of the heir is upside down, and you're supposed to rotate the card if the heir is in place. Some cards have multiple heirs, some have no heirs. If an emperor has a living heir available on it, that heir is going to have a couple of votes for the possibility of becoming the new emperor. The only people who are eligible, I believe, have to have a rank of 3. And then there's a whole list of things that allow you. Oh no, you can contend if you're stature 2. There's a whole thing that'll help you to become the emperor. The initial contender starts with 2 of them, stature 3, but not the emperor, and a titular claim to the throne. The players have titular claims listed here. So, for example, this is purple, whatever purple is. I think that's the Aragonese color, which looks more like burgundy to me, but okay. Over here, it's kind of pink here, so I don't know. Marriage to a princess of that empire counts as 2 additional conditions. Holding a spy card with that color is worth 1. Holding a revolt card, etc. Invading the empire can get you the claim, much as Henry V got his claim to France. If the Pope coronates you, this only works for Aragon, France, and the Habsburg thrones. Now, how does that happen? That happens if somebody holding the papal L card declares that they do in the midst of an election. They can coronate you to that kingdom and give you an additional vote there. And holding the Empire C card. So if you're the guy who already controls that empire completely, or if you just hold the Chancellery, that gives you an extra vote in this. And whoever has the most wins the empire. Ties go to the heir. Further ties will go to the side controlling the most armies total in the empire. Of course, the L card no longer has any armies, so you can't control the imperial armies. If a player himself is dead, he's out of the game. Well, okay, if the player's leader is dead, the player is out of the game unless he has an heir. If you go through all your heirs, you're gone, and that can eliminate you from the game. There are some rules for what gets transferred and what doesn't, and they've kind of been changed in the errata. But there's an effect with your heir He'll start at his lowest valued stature, what you started with. But if you died unmarried, your heir is illegitimate. And this means that the bastard has to discard all L cards of stature 2 or higher, including the Emperor, for rebidding. Which means another player could switch to your Empire if you've done well with it. In a 6-player game, usually each player has one Empire, so it really does involve switching empires. The Pope himself has some powers. He can excommunicate any Roman Catholic player. Any Roman Catholic player, who must then surrender for rebidding one card of the Pope's choice. But this has a cost of 5 AU, which has to come from the Pope's controller's own cash. You could bribe him to do it, but each player can only be excommunicated once in the game. So that, it's a way to shake one card loose. The coronation power, the Pope can allow someone to be divorced, which allows the princess to disappear. That has no effect on Orthodox and Muslims, obviously. The Pope can call a crusade, which forces 5 armies or fleets in Roman Catholic duchies to turn white. Black armies are immune to this conversion, black as the Ottomans, as are the armies in their capital or under a leader. Crusades are going to cost 10 AU of papal money and then another 5 AU of personal money for the Pope to play. After the Crusades announced, all the white counters are then disallowed from attacking any colors other than black until there are no black armies in any Roman Catholic duchies. You're only allowed 1 per game according to the errata. You can also pay 5 AU, and I think that's out of your personal treasure, to unify the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, at which point one army in a Greek Orthodox duchy turns to white without anything additional. The Pope can cancel any Roman Catholic lawsuit card. Well, not the Pope, his chancellor. All right, so how do you win the game? You want the most cash in your hand, and you get 10 gold for holding each of the rudders, which can, of course, be traded. The game can end by a number of ways. The treasury can run out of funds. Well, if I do that, this is, I think, too small an amount of money to play with. So that doesn't feel like a good choice. There's no set amount of funds, etc. Another choice is to play to specific years. They suggest 1479, and then you could play it all the way to 1499. But then there was this end of the game roll taken as an option from the Lords of the Sierra Madre, which I kind of like because it shakes up. You don't know when the game's going to end. At the end of each year, you're going to roll 2 dice and add the number of pestilences that happened. And as soon as you get a roll greater than 13, the game will end. So as soon as a pestilence happens, it starts increasing some risk of the game ending. I would put a fixed date, though, 1499, end of the game, because, well, I don't know. I can't think of a great reason for it, but it does at least put some kind of endpoint on it. All right. I still don't have a tremendous grasp on what's going to happen here. I have my memories of the game, but I'm going to struggle a little bit with it. I'm probably going to make quite a few mistakes. But let's get started on it and give this a shot, because I can't delay any longer and just have this kind of half set up and ready to go, and not willing to play it because I don't feel like I understand the rules enough.